we're recorded now. Everyone knows. Um, unless like we were recording before for someone's secret Twitch channel. But right now we are definitively recording. Um, but so basically this lecture is going to be me just like we're not going to be doing much new stuff. I might talk a little bit about like stuff that we might eventually be exposed to. But the goal here is to take a lot of our old stuff and figure out how we can pull it into an app. And I'm also going to be, as I like mentioned before, pulling from the Yelp API. So as I do that, we're going to be like that part. I'm probably not going to be explaining every single aspect. I'm down to like answer questions, but I kind of want to expose you all to it, talk about how I got through that process, and then move on to like building out this project. So I'm going to share my screen. Cool. And when we start the app, I have already created a user model with authentication, which we won't be going through in this lecture really, but I want to like just A, because it's useful for the sake of this lecture to have authentication, to have a current user, and B, because like we're eventually going to be exposed to, I think 2 weeks from now, I want to just start throwing it in every now and then. I also have some CSS. I have a little README. Just as a quick disclosure, this was a lecture that I originally designed for the in-person like curriculum, where it was like, hey, this is a Rails review. And so like the theme was like, hey, let's find places to grab lunch around like our in-person campus. Because at that time, if you remember about 6 months ago, a thing that humans would often be concerned with is where to get lunch together. And like going out and walking there. So this is a throwback. It's a little retro, but I do have a little README that will be helpful. And it is tragically feels dated in at this point in our lives. But basically, going through it before, so that like you know what's happening with our authentication. We have ones like in our models, we have this user and the name and this password digest. Have you all done bcrypt before? Yes, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So you're familiar. This works kind of the same way. This is just basic authentication. So we have basically the ability to like use these two little models right here to like when you log in, you get something stored in something called session. I think Sinatra also has session. It's a hash that we can use. And once we have that, we have, it's going to give us a little like thing that we're going to be running before any action, except I think for login, where we check the session ID, the session user ID, and then we set that equal to the user. So basically what this effectively means for us is that once I've logged in, if I haven't logged in, I'm only going to be able to log in on the app. That's all I've designed. I will be redirected to a login page. And anywhere in my app, once I'm logged in any controller, I will be able to call @current_user to refer to the user that is currently like doing this request. Cool? So that becomes a really big deal for like creating joiners between, the goal for this app is going to be to render a bunch of restaurants and have us to be able to review them. I also have some custom CSS. We can skim through that a little bit more quickly, but you'll see me start putting in divs rather than ULs. And that's because I like to use my CSS so that we can have some fun here. Do we have any questions before we get started about how we've set this up? Cool. So in that case, I'm going to hop to the README, because in this case, I do have some requirements. Oh, one other thing that I have available. Have any of you worked with .env files or hidden files? So .env is a Rails gem. It's one of the ways you can hide a file from from GitHub, so you don't send it up, while still establishing it as a global environmental variable, which is where env comes from. It means environmental variable. It's going to be usable in development and testing, and then when you get to production, you probably have to like configure your app so that when it spins up, it saves an environmental variable, which like Heroku or whatever will teach you how to do. But basically, it works like this. I established that I like installed this .env Rails gem. I have this local .env file that has a Yelp key and a Google key, just in case. And then, so this is not going to be pushed up to GitHub. Specifically, I put it because I put it in my git ignore, this .env file. But now that I have this right here, when I establish this key value pair of Yelp key equals and then my secret Yelp key, which also please don't live stream on Twitch, lest people order pizzas on my account. Basically, I can now call env at a key of Yelp key. And anywhere in my app, this env becomes accessible, but it's not going to be pushed to GitHub. So if you're like cloning down this app eventually and you want to do it yourself, you go to Yelp and you sign up for your own API key. We'll talk about that in a bit. I'm not really going to go through signing up for an API key because you're all used to signing up for websites. And it's the same thing. It's like, be like, I want an API key. Are you logged into Yelp? Yes. Fill out this form, say what your app is for, and then they'll like give you an API key. So this is going to be useful for security. Cool. So
I have a question. Mm-hmm. So what is the point of the gem? We've used git ignore and added hidden keys before, but I don't understand the point of the gem that you were using.
This just establishes it as an environmental variable, where like you can call it in other ways, but environmental variable, there's already a bunch of Rails environmental variables that just get spun up with you for you. There's other ways to do it. Like this is one of several. It's one I'm most comfortable with. But like if you have like another way, if you're like, hey, I'm saving a YML file with a bunch of variables on it, that works too. This just shoves it into an environmental variable key. I like it because it becomes easy in production too. You're just like, oh, I'm still using env. Like I know what's going on. But there's like 3 or 4 different solutions to this problem.
Does it work just like secrets.rb?
Secrets.rb is a Ruby file, right?
Yeah.
So
and it grays out just like your
Yes, it grays out because it's in the git ignore. That's why I was just trying to.
Oh.
Whenever you get ignore will pretty much gray out an item, so you can't push it to GitHub. That's why I was just confused on what that gem is doing still.
Yeah. env is just setting this as an environmental variable from a .env file. It's a common way to save the secret keys. It's not the only one. There's also like you could do whatever you want. You could probably even like throw in a secret controller that never gets pulled up to GitHub, like with where you save things. There's a bunch of different ways to hide environmental variables. This is just A, what I was taught, B, a really common pattern. Cool. So at this point, I'm going to go to my README because I have a bunch of stipulations for how this app should run so that we don't get caught on the boring stuff. I'm going to bundle install. I think I already did that. Bleh. I'm going to Rails DB reset. And my goal for this app is strictly, I'm going to find a bunch of restaurants by like the place where, like a location. I was thinking just, unless people like want to be like, hey, I want to find restaurants near me, and I want this lecture to be about me bad enough that I'm willing to disclose my address to everyone else here in the Zoom chat, I can just use the Flatiron Brooklyn campus as the address. How do people feel about that? Cool. That sounds like a yes. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create these models, right? I'm going to create a restaurants model. Or I'm going to actually do the resource because I'm going to need both. I'm going to need the controller too. and I'm going to add all these things that they asked me to add. Great. And finally, after this, they asked for, oh, come on. Embarrassing. Forgot to include the model name. Cool. Don't do that. Resource restaurant. There we go. Now this should work. Cool. And now second, I'm going to include a little, I'm going to also want to include a reviews model. And I want that to, I want basically user to be able to review many restaurants and a restaurant to have many reviews. So in addition to content and rating, what foreign keys will I need here?
Are you talking about like IDs? Like content ID? Okay.
Well, but for relationships to other models, what keys do I need?
Yeah, user ID and rest. Oh, somebody put it in the chat. There we go.
Yep, both of you are correct. Cool. So I'm going to do Rails G resource because I'm also going to need this controller a little bit. And then I'm going to have, I'm going to call this review. And I'm going to say content, rating, integer. And the two foreign keys are restaurant ID and review ID, right? Or restaurant ID and user ID. So I can do restaurant belongs to. I said that I would, like last time I did like the integer. There's another way to do it. This sets up an association. Now, like other times I've done restaurant ID integer and user ID integer. I'm fine with you doing it this way. I've shared that multiple times. It's basically the same, but I want to show you the other way too. Belongs to is also the same thing as references. But here we go. Okay, let's make sure this migrates. Cool. So in the schema, this now still makes sense. We've got a restaurant ID, we've got a user ID. Awesome. And we can make sure that this links up in our models. Has many views. Has many users through reviews. If I put this in the reverse order, will it work? Exactly. Yeah. It'll even be like wrong order error or something. It's like it really tries to help you out there. And because I wrote belongs to rather than like had like being like user ID blah blah blah, it's just gonna spam that out for us in review, so we don't actually need to change anything in review. And username or in user we have has many reviews, has many restaurants through reviews. How are you feeling so far? Cool. So at this point, we can pretty much get started. Usually I would test. I don't feel like writing out all of the information for a restaurant, so I'm willing to just be wrong and break it and then debug it later. But I mentioned that we're just populating the restaurants once, really. Like we're just being like, hey, what are the restaurants around this location? And a lot of times when you like make API calls, there's a lot of debate about like, hey, do you put this in model? Do you put this in helper? There's going to be part of this that we're going to relate to model, but actually calling the API itself just once, I say like there's a lot of debate about where to do that. I say just YOLO and put in seeds if you want to, and that's what I'm going to be doing. Like this is just a Ruby file. This will run when I call Rails DB seed, and I can make my API call here. Now let's keep this README open. Let's keep closing it. Cool. Bloop, bloop. And now we're going to go away from Rubyland for a while because I want to talk through hitting the Yelp API. So basically, we can just Google it. Yelp API. It's probably go to documentation. And now I'm just going to be like, let's first see if there's if the introduction's helpful. Yeah, getting started with the Yelp API. Usually in the introduction, I like to read at least this section, check out the authentication. Now, basically, but like, and if you read this, you're going to see a few different things. First off, there's a tutorial. Uses a private key authentication to authenticate all endpoints. So we can click here. We'll open this as a tab for later, right? And it says like, hey, below is a list of all endpoints. It says you can also try it out yourself using Postman. And then it also says you can find small code samples for Node.js, Python, Ruby, and other languages here. So I'm going to open that up. And I'm probably just going to steal that, honestly. But before that, I kind of want to open this up in Postman and talk about it. Does anyone know what Postman is?
I do. I love it.
Yeah. Postman, when you're starting to think about APIs and stuff, Postman or Insomnia, or I think there's a Postwoman too, which is like a browser clone. They're all super useful tools that I'm going to show you a little bit about. Basically what Postman does is it allows you to make your own, make and test requests, which makes it great for testing your own backends, which is going to be really important in Mod 3. Like if you don't want to have to like really explicitly write everything out in JavaScript, they make things super easy for you. And it's also good for if you just like want to try to hit someone else's API. I usually recommend you try it out in Postman before you try to code it out yourself, because Postman has a GUI interface that is really awesome. Basically, I just clicked this. Yelp gave me these 6 different searches that like search endpoints. Now, I skimmed through this Yelp thing a bunch of other times, but it seems like there's 6 different types of ways to search, right? And I think the one that we obviously want to do is search for businesses based on keyword, category, location, or price level, or whatever. I think we're doing location here, right? We don't want to look for a specific ID. This looks a little bit too explicit for me. We don't need a ping for an individual's business ID. This right here is great, right? So first off, we can click it. And I'm going to hop over to here for a second. This is an important line that I'm going to show in a couple of different ways. It says to authenticate API calls with the API key, set the authorization HTTP header value as bearer API key. And it says literally the words bearer and then your API key. So we're going to have a value that's this word bearer and then our API key, right? And the header is going to be authorization. This is a really common pattern. It's called a bearer token. But I'm going to like talk about that in a little bit more detail before we get into it. This is a brief introduction to HTTP requests. When you get into JavaScript and you start writing your own fetches, that's when usually for almost every student, this idea of like what comprises an HTTP request becomes much more graspable, because in JavaScript you have to write like explicitly like, I want to make a fetch to this address with this method using these headers, using this body with this stuff, and you'll eventually like just get really used to writing this. But I'm going to like do a quick overview of a fetch request right now, or a HTTP request right now. An HTTP request is made up of a few things. One is the method, right? So get, post, put, patch, delete, you're all familiar with. Some other garbage that we don't have to talk about. And then there's also a few other things. Authorization, this is something that we can kind of skip over. Postman does a lot to try to abstract authorization from you. It's really usually just a way of packaging headers. Like Postman will try to accept cookies for you. They'll try to do other things. But basically, parameters, query parameters, refer to things that you send over here. So you'll notice how Yelp has automatically populated for us this like term, delis, right? Latitude, this, longitude, this. It's given this as a sample to be like, hey, where's the delis near? I bet this is somewhere in California because startups are obsessed with themselves. And you'll see that this right here then started filling out this. What makes Postman so good is if I'm like, hey, I want to edit my query parameters, I can just be like lunch, and it'll start doing that for me, right? So eventually, we're looking for lunch places, so it's probably going to look something like this. There's also headers, right? And this is where it gives us a blank bearer, right? If you remember from our authorization, our quick scan through that README, it said that we're expecting the value to be bearer plus our own authorization token. So I'm just going to copy my .env over. I'll just copy this. Boop. And now the body is usually where you encapsulate form data from forms, right? So when I'm making a post request, this becomes important. When I'm making a get request, we don't have a body. Our get request, our parameters come over from these URL params. Body is used for when we're starting to make a post request, when we're trying to copy things from our form. That was a brief overview of a lot of stuff that I'm mostly skimming through. How are we feeling? Yeah. So Postman is awesome because I can then test this right here and see if I'm doing anything wrong. And you'll see, it's now giving me lunch places in San Francisco. It like gives me the response. I can click through this and see like, hey, what headers did they send over when they sent it? But like you'll see, this works. If I make a get request with these parameters, with this header, and it seems like they made some like temporary headers for me that are less important, like this will work, right? And I can test out different things too. Like let's close this out right here. Here we go, business search endpoint. There's a bunch of parameters that Yelp's API says we can use. It says location, and it says, hey, location can be either New York City, NYC, this. Basically, Yelp is being like, hey, we just opened up our location search for you. This is what the users use, so we don't have to be like, because we're coders, we don't suddenly have to be really explicit about everything. Sometimes life just gives you nice things, including the ability to type out a search in a bunch of different ways, even when you're working with an API. So we appreciate that. They say it either requires a location or latitude and longitude. We've got a radius, like a search like radius, which will be helpful for us. And then a limit. By default, it will return 20. Maximum number is 50. Definitely going to make my limit 50. And I'm going to be like, location. And I'm going to say, let's say 89 Prospect Street. I remember where I used to work. Brooklyn, New York. Let's see if that works. Let's not put this in quotes because they're doing that. They like to do it. And I'm going to send this over. Yep, I've eaten a bread and spread. I have a rewards card that will forever go unfulfilled. Westville, I've eaten at other Westvilles, but like I like to be able to eventually afford an apartment. That's already not going to happen. They only sell avocado toast, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so this works, right? Like we now know that if we make a GET request to vaguely this route, we put in our headers something called authorization, the bearer of this, it'll work. And like we can just, if only there was some way for us to just get this code and then just put it into Ruby, right? I'm just gonna click this little code thing. Postman, one of the awesome things about Postman is it will export your requests for you in whatever way you want. So if you want one in Ruby, it'll export in Ruby. This is awful. I hate this. We also don't want this to look like that. But we can copy this over. And if this doesn't work, usually my way of doing Yelp is just to go over here. And I'm like, Yelp Fusion, awesome. This is like their little code samples link that I clicked over here. You're like, code samples. And you can go over, you can be like, oh, cool, they have something for Ruby. I'm going to go over to Ruby. And it's just like, hey, here's like a bunch of different tools you can use. Like, we define a search for you. But I don't care about like using their little user interface. I can also click in here and just like look at their code and be like, oh, so this is what you do? And like, I'll probably like replace some of these bad boys with what I want. So there's many different ways I can copy and paste my code without having to learn how to write an HTTP request. And that's what I'm going for. So we can try either way. I'll start with this one because I've done it less often. Cool, let's copy this. I'm gonna go to DB Seeds, boop. I'm gonna get rid of all these dumb little things that that Postman gives me. Let's just try this out. This might break. Yep, definitely broke. I'll probably be like, hey, why are you requiring gems in your end of file reached? Oh, that's something that can be weird. Nope. Postman is not always correct. Let's just put a bye bug right here. You have to save. Bloop, bloop. Fine, I'm going to be begrudgingly. Also, I don't want to just write my bearer token out. I'm going to begrudgingly copy and paste the code sample. I'm just excited to do something new, you know? Just going to copy all of this. Sorry, Postman, you failed me, though. There's definitely a way to debug that in a better way. I'm going to copy the search method that they have. I'm going to just change it up a little bit. 89 Prospect Street, Brooklyn, and Y. I'm going to say lunch right here. I'm going to get rid of these two things, which we don't need. I'm going to make this as unreusable as possible because I don't plan on reusing it. You might be able to do something else in your app. You might be like, hey, I want people to be able to actually search rather than just searching for the places where Nicky once grabbed lunch. And that's totally fair. That's up to you. In that case, it's left as an exercise to the reader to figure out how to to make this something that works for more than just my lunch. So here I mentioned that we've actually got to write env Yelp key. And apart from this, I am just stealing Yelp code. Now, before I go any further, this is something you can write. Like, it's not. There's like HTTP party. There are a bunch of other gems you can use to making an HTTP request in Ruby, and you'll notice there's like 4 of them because they're all like just different interfaces for doing pretty much the same thing that we just did in Postman. One of the easier ones is you can actually in Ruby make a post request by just, I think it's like curl www.google.com. Might be wrong. Yeah, and you can just do a request by just doing things in backticks, doing curls and backticks. So, and that's, I think, just basically trying to be the same as curl google.com. It's like backticks are basically, hey, do the terminal commands, if I'm remembering correctly. There's a lot of different ways to do things in Ruby. It's telling me to chill with just pinging google.com randomly from my command line. But right here, we can try this out. Rails dbseed. I'm going to type search. And now I have this huge hash that looks like a list of lunches. So I just threw an absurd amount at you while talking very quickly. But this code works. If I run search, I get back this big annoying thing. So I'm going to take a break here and ask, we all good? I just totally lost everybody. Cool. Anything really confusing that you want to go over or you feel like is actually helpful? Cool. So basically, I copied and pasted from Yelp. And now I can start doing things with this. First off, I'm going to make it so that search isn't a method. I just want to store the results of that search. So I'll just call something called results equals search. Now it's going to ping it one more time, but now I have this thing called results. Now here's the annoying thing about pretty much any time you hit an API. What you're going to get back is this huge, ugly hash of arrays of hashes of arrays, and then you're going to figure out what to do with it. And a lot of that is just learning to navigate your way through hashes. There's a lot of methods that are going to be really helpful for you. My first one is I'm going to eventually want, first off, we have to figure out our goals. So my first thing is, my goal is to get all of the businesses in this hash into my own database. I want to make it so that I iterate through each one of them. And for each one of them, save them in my database. That's our goal. So ideally, if I can get to an array of businesses, then I can begin writing a method to save each business, right? So this is obviously really unreadable. There's you don't have to be, usually if you're going like this and you're squinting your way through a hash, you can see oh, there's this big key of businesses that's super helpful. That's one way to do it. You can just start squinting your way through a hash to see what's going on. Usually what I do though, there's a few things that are really helpful, such as I know that this ends in a hash, so I can call some hash methods on it, like keys. And now I have 3 keys that are really easy to hopefully understand. We can pretty much guess what these are, right? What do we think businesses is?
A hash of an array of businesses.
Yeah, it's plural. It says businesses, probably an array of businesses. Total is probably something like a number of the amount of businesses there are. Oh, that's a lot. And then it's an amount of something. I don't need it. I can write 5,000 by myself. And then regen. Oh, it's to an absurd level of decimal precision, almost definitely wrong. The degree, like to the atom, where Flatiron School Brooklyn is. You don't need to do this ever. Like NASA doesn't do this. But and it's almost definitely wrong. Ruby will definitely get it wrong. It's not good at decimals. I've shown you this. So like you'll notice this is the same amount of digits as that, but the thing that matters to us is results at businesses, right? The results at businesses, we can see from the end here, or from doing the class, that this is going to be an array. So my guess is that businesses, I'd say my guess, you all know I've done this before, but when I was going through it the first time, my guess was that businesses is probably going to be what we need to iterate through. But to prove it, the first thing we got to do is let's see what one business looks like, right? So I'll be like, hey, results of businesses, the first business you can give me. And now I've got that bread and spread. Let's see if I've still got this here. I'm not going to dig. I shared it with another co-coach and she might have these, but if not, come on. Nope, don't have it with. She has the, oh, are you kidding me? She has the mostly done rewards card. Heartbreaking.
And you know she's going to get the reward.
I know, yeah, no. Like, because I would do the same thing and she knows me well. We're co-coaches. Okay, so bread and spread, the until recently very conveniently close to a free sandwich establishment is one of these businesses. And this is still pretty hard to read. But we can continue to do something like .keys, right? And you'll see this is suddenly something we can use, right? There's still a few challenges that I have to get to, right? To like make this into something that I can use, like, or that I can like to make this into a create method for me. But at this point, I can start saying, hey, search businesses that each do, or I can even be like each business. And now I'm just going to say restaurant, create business by Yelp, hash, a little long, business, right? I can do this, and this isn't a method that Ruby has. Rails isn't that good. Active Record doesn't have a embedded thing for Yelp. But I'm just saying, I'm going to write this out next. I'm thinking at this point, absolutely include this in either my, like, in probably my restaurant model, because this is going to be dealing with the database. There might be an argument to make it a helper. I say its only job is to create something in the database and then return it from that database. So I've like decided, hey, this is probably going to be the method that I'm going to use to save all of these businesses. Cool. So I realize I'm doing like search at a key of businesses rather than like storing that to a variable and then using it. But it's just going to be like, it's going to evaluate search. It's going to give me the result, and then it's going to call businesses on it, right? You know, you can like, there's like a bunch of weird things. You can just tag things onto other things as much as you want. Like if I wanted to, I could do like, Rails allows me to do this because it's dumb and wonderful. Like I can always be like .unique, and then it'll give me the unique. Like you can put stuff on the .end, and it'll just keep evaluating things and then doing other things to it. Cool, let's fix this. Cool. Spent almost too much time on this API. So at this point, you can trust me that I'm going to have to, let's open up our schema. Wow. I just made a pie symbol accidentally. That's awesome. I didn't make a pie. That would be more impressive. Cool. So I need to get the name, the URL, the lat, longitude, the types of food, the address, and the types of food. So eventually, like, if we're going over here, I like named a method, so I should probably remember what that is. I'm gonna just copy this. Trying to copy this through your faces. Here we are. Cool. Here I can start using this def self dot end. And now I can start writing my create method, right? I can be like create. And now basically what I have to do is I have to be like, what are my keys? I'm just gonna, here, y'all are gonna be small for a sec. And one day I'll get a second, I'm gonna probably move in a month and then I'll get a second screen. So like this right here would probably be like business, the key of name, right? Oh, right. That the key of name. In this case, like this results businesses 0 represents business. Like I can set that equal to business. This works. I can like get the business's URL too. Like you saw that I have like this URL, this image URL. For coordinates, I have to like go in a little bit more in depth and be like, hey, coordinates. Foolish. And now you can all like spend the next 15 minutes watching me navigate a hash, or I did save it into the README, and I'm just going to do that instead. So we can get on to other things. This right here is the eventual code we're going to be using. But does everyone see how I got to this code? I'm going to paste it. The weirdest thing I do is I decided that instead of making like an array of categories for my kind, for like what kind of food it is, right? So like this right here is an array of keys that's like has their Yelp alias, and I just want the title, right? So I just like mapped all the titles and I joined them with commas. That was a design decision on my part. I just like having them as one strings, and I'll show you why later. But everyone kind of a little bit comfortable with what I did here. Just navigated a hash, created this create method. We all good up to this point? Cool.
Do you have to create, or can you just like do new and then save it later? Is that an option? Or I know it's just for your app, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, I could, but then like basically at the end, like over in the seeds, like it's really convenient to just be like, hey, for each of them, just create them. And then if it errors out, it'll just go on, like it'll either break or go on to the next one. But because like all I want to do is save it to my database, I don't like need to do additional things to it. There's other ways to do it. This is, I just think, the easiest. But yeah, you can do a bunch of things with this because like this dot each, just like I could be like, hey, like first call, like I could be like, do this, and I'll be like, new business. And in this case, I'd be using the new, and I'll be like restaurant equals restaurant dot save, and then that's totally fine too. It's really flexible. In this case, I'm just using a create because I know it'll work. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right, let's now that I said I know it'll work. There's a Coke Zero. I'm excited about it. So here we are. We have this, and I can begin using it. And I can just use it by running railsdb seed, because this is just a Ruby file. I should probably save this first, and hopefully, that's actually right here. Restaurant equals self dot create. Let's restaurant dot name. Let's have some fun. Let's let's get some results here. Look, it created a bunch of different restaurants. Cool, and we had this little puts thing. It worked. So now I can check out I can go to Rails C and go restaurant dot all, got a lot of restaurants, dot length, 50, dot pluck, name. I could have probably made this, I don't know most of these places, probably because I didn't make the radius short enough. Like 4 or 5 blocks is like really the maximum for walking out. They're probably all inside of, like, there's this tourist trap called Timeout Market where it's like everything's like $19, but it's like all like bootleg versions of all the like the best touristy restaurants in New York City. So feel free to check that out if you're looking for like really expensive versions of other foods that are still really good. But so we've got this. This works. I'm going to go back to this. We now have our restaurants, and we can begin actually spinning up our app because I just spent 40 minutes talking through the Yelp API. So right now, we can start testing our stuff, or we could just keep going and YOLO. So here, we should probably... Oh, they have an instruction right here. I'm going to actually like follow this instruction. I have an instruction. Past me has an instruction that current me is going to follow. It says before action authorized to the top of our restaurants controller and our reviews controller. Once again, we're going to learn a lot more about auth in our authorization section, but this is just a beginning exposure. And this basically just says, hey, before you do any action here, run this action authorized, which says, hey, if you don't have a current user, if like a current user doesn't exist, if we don't have a session ID, we're going to flash an error that says login, please, and then redirect to login. Cool. Locks down our app from anything that's not our logging in. So right now, we can start doing things immediately. We can start by building an index. And we know how to build an index, right? What do I put here?
Def index.
Yes. And we can be like restaurants equals restaurant dot all boom time. And now in our views, we can say, Kirsten might be making hot dogs, but she's vegetarian, but smells like hot dogs in here. So this is going to make me think a lot about food. So here we have our index.html.erb. Let's go with a cyberpunk theme. Just be like execute eating or nourish.exe. There we go. And we'll just be like, and now we just basically start rendering through our restaurants. I have instructions for formatting because I put in CSS in this one. So I'm going to start being like, first, let's actually test our app at this point because I have not gone to Rails S yet, and that's bad. Don't be that, okay. I'm actually going to be even further best practice and be like git add dot git commit m restaurants seed from Yelp.
You want to save that index file?
Yeah, there we go. And I'm also going to git checkout class dash b saying, hey, that's a new branch. You're not going to find this on my list of branches with this dash b. Class self. Cool. And now git status. Yeah, it's still, we're still, I think, good. So here we are, following best practice, being good developers. We'll write Rails S. And we are going to go back to my Chrome. And here's Flunchiron School. Here's our login. So I'm going to create an account. This is not going to break, is it? Cool. Nicky, 123. Oh, I didn't even hide my password. Awesome. So here we go. Just a text field. And now we've got nourish.exe. Cool. So this still works, and we can start rendering through things. So it's saying right here, for the sake of formatting, we're going to use some divs rather than some cards. So I'm going to first start off with this div that I'm going to call cards. And we're going to do this rather than like a ul/ul thing. I'm just going to make them all a list of cards. I have like a flexbox that I'm going to show you how that works in CSS that we can use. And the CSS lecture is once again still coming. So here, restaurants. Each do restaurant. No squid. And now we got some slash or div. It's asking me to make these individual card. And it's saying render out all the restaurant names with links to the show page and include an image. Cool, cool. Image tag. Boom time. Rails will do everything for you. I'm going to say restaurant.image URL. What does it say about image tag? Cool. And then link to, I'm going to say restaurant.name, restaurant. That little break right here. Cool. So let's go see what this does. For me, it shows a picture of Kyle. And here we are. We have right here a lot of restaurants, right? And this looks kind of cool. I don't like that it's not centered. Let's talk about Flexbox for a second. Flexbox is a helpful thing. I'm going to go to assets, style sheets. I probably wrote this in application, like a monster. And so basically Flexbox is what it allows it to do this. It's like, oh, cool. So I'm going to like kind of align these contents on the page, and then I'm going to start wrapping. So now like what Flexbox allows us to do is this thing right here. Look at how dynamic that is, right? It's a really helpful CSS thing. But I can make it better by being like, where's my Flexbox? There we go. Justify content. I'm going to do space around, which just says that, hey, we're going to make sure that they're evenly spaced between, like we have even space around themselves. Slightly different than space between. I'm better at showing than explaining it. I think basically space between doesn't like there's no gap on the left and right side. Space around adds that. But now we have what right here looks like a very powerful little user interface. Questions so far? We're familiar with rendering out a list of restaurants. If we click on these, we're going to get, let's go to bread and spread. We're going to get this error because we don't have this yet. So right here, do def show. And honestly, I'm not going to have my users able to destroy a restaurant or create a restaurant because this is all from Yelp. So index and show are pretty much all I need, right, for a restaurant. So I don't even need to refactor this. I'll be like at restaurant equals restaurant that find params ID, spelling restaurant incredibly correctly. And now we have this restaurant, right? And this is basically going to make up our entire controller for this app, or for a restaurant for this app. So I'm going to right now be a good developer and just go to routes over here. I'm going to say only index and show, and I'm going to keep it as minimized as possible so that you all can't see what I'm doing. Here, let's just open that up a sec. Cool. Be comfortable. All right. So, I might have to change this restaurant's controller a little bit later if we wanted to get fancy with the spices. But for now, we now have a show thing right here. I can go over to my README. We can see what we have to do for show. Here we are. Wait, hold up. Get status. Or actually, let's be fancy. This might. I'm gonna use the get feature on VS Code. These are all my changes and all my files. So I'm going to be like, hey, I'm going to commit index page. I'm going to loop, loop, loop. That's probably incorrect. I'm going to be like this. Check. There we go. Now I'm going to be like show routes and controller. Boom time. There's another way to do this. Whoops. That I'm way less used to than just writing it out. But it's something that VS Code has access to. I access it with Control Shift G. Source control. Another way to do GitHub, if it makes you feel cooler. Cool? We're learning our GitHub here. And now we are safe in the knowledge that we've got a good Git log. So here we go. We have, we are going to create this now. Show.html.erb. I'll move this over here where my, like this is, I like to, especially for code challenges, but for like everything else, like when I'm working on labs or something, I like to keep the README and like things that I need, like the schema. So I can like look at variables on one side and then my actual coding over here. This is just my workflow. And then that also allows me to, when I like do a code challenge, I'll like just start commenting out sections of the README once I'm done with them. But here we are, we have the show page, which has a whole lot of deliverables for us to solve. It says first, wrap everything in a show, div class equals show, done. Awesome. And now the first thing it says is H1. That includes the restaurant's name and the link to its website. So at restaurant, definitely involved there, but I probably need a link to. Restaurant.name, I know. Restaurant, the link to its website, we've got a URL. And just a spoiler alert, this URL might link to that restaurant's actual website, but Yelp also has that if that restaurant doesn't have a website in its database, it links to its Yelp page. So that's just a little fun fact for you if you're considering knowing a whole lot about Yelp's API. And it might become useful later when I start showing you the functionality. Should have underneath a jumbotron of the image provided by the Yelp API. That just means an image that stretches across the whole page. And I definitely did write the CSS for that. I'm going to do restaurant, or I'm going to do image tag. I'm not going to autofill that because I don't want an extra set of things. I'm going to go restaurant image URL. That was what I think what it is, right? Cool. List the kinds of food. P. Come on. Trying to go through this a little bit quickly for you. At restaurant, kinds of food /p. At restaurant address. guessing I'm probably wrong on both of these, but yep, kind of food. That's why it's helpful to have that schema right there. And then a form to submit the review, average ratings, and things like this. There's a bunch of other deliverables. I'm going to first check to see what's up, see that we made something happen. And there we go. Cool. We've got right here a restaurant page. Questions about how we got to this point that aren't related to CSS? Cool. So now we have right here this requirement that says it should have a form to submit a review. This is a little bit different from what we're usually used to, right? Usually our form is on like the reviews/new page, but I don't even want to have a review page on this website. Like I don't want people to be able to see all the reviews on the app in some sort of list. That would just be like a little bit, that would be coding for coding's sake. And if you like typing a lot, that might be helpful. But really I just want like, hey, you can create a review, right? And then it just shows up on that page, much like actual Yelp, I bet, I hope. See if, first off, this doesn't work if Yelp doesn't have, but there we go. Like right here, this is where I start commenting, right? And this is where all the comments are. I don't have to go to a new page for this. So I want this functionality for Flunchiron School to stay the same. So right here, how do we start going about creating a form on the show page for restaurant?
Couldn't you just start building out a form for?
Yeah. What would I put here?
Would be something like at restaurant.review.build.
That could work. I'm going to be really, really cheap and just say at review. And actually, I realized that was a leading question that's possibly incorrect. Eventually, we are going to be learning about nested routes, which will make this, how we do this, slightly different. I'm going to be showing you how to solve this without a nested route. And then we can talk through a little bit about when, like how we could use a nested route to get around like one of the couple of things we're going to do here. So I'm going to really quickly just now create, or no, this is not where I want to be. I'm going to go over to this restaurants controller. And I'm just going to say, hey, at review.new, right? Or at review, nope, I'm not going to do that at all. At review equals review.new. And what I'm saying here is like, hey, you're also going to need an empty review that we can create a form for. But I think that very good instinct on wanting to build it from restaurant, because that becomes something that like when we do nested routes, we might be able to like use a form for in a slightly different way to make it so that it starts with the association. Just for a brief digression on that, or actually we'll do a brief digression on that after we build this out. So for review, we need a couple of things, right? Take a look. For review, we need a content and a rating. That we can do, definitely. F.text field, content. Probably like this first. F.label, content. And actually, I'm going to make content, I want it to be a text area, which is just like, hey, let's make this a big thing where people can write a paragraph. Text field is usually implied that you're trying to like enter a small piece of information, like a first name. Text area is like, hey, start posting. So this is like this little text area. This is where you bring out the badness of the internet by allowing people to post long-winded things. But if we didn't want to enable that, we wouldn't be in this job, right? And I'm going to like also say right here, f.number field, right? Will be like rating. And then it's like an in, right? 1 dot dot. Do you want it to be 1 to 5 or 1 to 10?
5.
5. Okay, cool. A lot of people said 5 at the same time. We're really making a Yelp clone. Now, there's a big question of these two, right? Restaurant ID and user ID. We ideally want this to come through in order to create a review, right? First, let's add this f.submit. Now, so we have to ask ourselves, like, I don't want to do a collection select here. Yelp doesn't do a collection select, and if Yelp doesn't do it, I definitely don't want to. Because eventually they might want to hire me, and then they'll be like, oh, but he doesn't even know how to do this without a collection select. And I'll be like, I know. So basically, we need to get the restaurant ID and the user ID to somehow get into reviews. Anyone have an idea of where we might find the information for either of these?
You have to put in a hidden field.
Heck yeah, I was hoping that would take more time so I could drink my iced coffee. So we can do like f.hidden field. And what do we want to solve here? Restaurant ID?
Is it at that's the you need to reference the at restaurant ID.
Cool.
Wait.
I'll write that out. You were spot on here. Great answer. Cool. What this says is we're going to hide a restaurant ID in this form that'll get sent over, that will send over the value of restaurant ID. Now, here is like a point where you might be tempted to be like, hey, we can solve the user ID thing here too. Because I mentioned that we have access to @current_user, right? Let's do that. See if that breaks something. Current user.id, right? And I'm going to show you. Oh, wait, hold up. Let's put this all in a div for reviews. Cool. Cool, and I'll add some break tags. PR, 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 PR. Great. And a little f.submit. Oh, wait, that's already there. Cool, I'm going to scroll down, or I'm going to just move you all out of the way. And like this right here, this is awesome. This could probably work. I can inspect this right here. Cool. And you'll see, like, I've got my restaurant ID in here. And I have my user ID also in here, right? So like both of these work. If I send this across, these are all the parameters I need to create a review. Anyone notice what could potentially be a problem here, though? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's specifically with user ID.
We don't, because it belongs to, like, it has to also belong to the user, right?
Yeah, and that's what this will do for us, right? A review is going to be created with like a rating, content, restaurant ID, and user ID. That's all we need, right? And it will, if I send these 4 parameters over and I like require them and I permit them, it will successfully create a review. That is not the issue I'm trying to point out. Is anyone able to see another potential issue?
Do we have any users?
We do. We have one right now.
Oh, you made one. Okay, my bad.
Yeah.
I missed that.
That's how I'm logged in. When I said like create user and then like I logged in, that's how it works. If I didn't have a user, I wouldn't be able to navigate this app.
Gotcha.
This is a tough question. Do you want me to reveal the answer?
Yes.
Cool. So I'm from New York City, and I have a friend who I shouldn't name on this Zoom chat, so I'm just going to call him Hunter Owens. He's from LA, and he he has very strong opinions about tacos. He will routinely say, my friend's on taco Twitter. He has helped write a book on tacos, and he believes that New York City doesn't have any good tacos at all. He says that the tortillas are just wrong. They don't make something in the flour. I don't know. He's got very strong opinions on tacos. Now, I, over here, am reviewing restaurants in New York, right? And I happen to be I happen to be a user, right? And my user ID happens to be 1. Does it have to be, though? If I could figure out what his user ID is, I could switch that to 3 and then be posting from a different user. And suddenly I could go to a New York City taco establishment's page on this app, and I could, as Hunter, review a New York City taco place positively. And that sort of security breach, it represents a big threat, right? So like putting this in a hidden field, just giving this to the user is probably a really bad move, right? So I'm going to actually delete this. And there's another easy way to do this that avoids having this problem. But do you see why that security feature might be a little bit dangerous? Just asking the user to give their own ID after doing all the problems of like logging in and stuff. Cool. I'm going to then just go back to my reviews controller. I'm going to create this def create and private.
So based off of what you just said, if they knew that a user ID was a thing, could they just add that value into that HTML when they submit it?
If I permitted it.
Oh, okay.
Yep. If I then went over here and did something really crazy like def review params, and I did something crazy like this, params.require review.permit content rating, and then I've got restaurant ID. The clever ones of you are smart enough to realize I didn't make up a fake name for Hunter. Please don't stalk him on Twitter. So here we go. If I did this, suddenly they could start sending in their own user ID, right? But there's another better way to do this. So I'm going to like save this. I'm going to put a bybug here.
Is there a way to use your current user or the session you're in?
Yeah. We could always do something like this. At current user dot reviews dot create. And here, at current user is accessing my encrypted session data. Like this is, the user has sent over, by the time it hits this, it's already authorized as at current user. So here it's secure. And now I can just call review params. Cool? I wasn't even going to teach that. I realized here that like, yeah, using a hidden field would be really dangerous, and I should probably talk about that right now. So here we go. Review equals this. And we can do validations here, but right now they're for nerds. So I'm going to redirect to, and then just review.restaurant, right? And we should probably, just because I'm not ready yet to put review created, so that we don't have to like, we can already see that this like works before I make this happen. So bread and spread, 5. I went through 6 rewards cards with the help of my BCF, best coach forever, Gracie. And we can submit this. And this went through, hopefully, and we can check right here by seeing it saying review created, and also seeing the commit transaction, which is way better than review created at being more correct. But this works. We now have a review right here. So I'm going to really quickly now render out each individual other review. So now I can say right here at restaurant.reviews.each do review. And we'll do this bad and then make it good. Div class equals review. I'm going to stop for a second. In terms of what we did in the controller, is this something we're all familiar with, basically? If we have an at user, this is something we can do, right? It's like, it's being like, oh, you're creating a reviews for user? Cool, I'm just going to pass in this user's ID if that's cool with you. It doesn't even ask, Rails knows. Rails knows you're chill and wants you to pass in those, IDs, right? So that's what this is doing right here. So you can go over to our show. And I can start making this review happen. So first off, we can be like user or review.user.username : we can do something like review.rating. Make this awful thing happen. Review.content. We can check this out and it works. And we now have reviews going on, right? This is lame though, for a couple of reasons. One, it just says 5. What's 5? If this were like up to 6 and I put 6, you'd be like, cool, Motley Crue wrote. I'll be like Nicky 6. But like, we obviously want rating to be more indicative of a rating, right? So here's where we can start like adding some other things to make this a little bit nicer. One thing that I would think would be nicer is if instead of just being the rating, it rendered a number of stars equal to that rating, right? So where do you think we could put a function like that? Because I don't want to start writing a lot of logic here.
The review model? Yeah, review model.
We could. I was thinking though, because like stars just has to do with presentation.
Oh, so probably a helper.
Yeah. So helpers, because I still haven't officially covered these in lectures, are things that we have access to in our controllers and our views through this little helper file, right? Whenever you create something in Rails, whenever you create a controller in Rails, it'll generate a helper for you, which is to do things that exist outside of the MVC paradigm. So things that, like models deal with the database, right? Their job is to hang out with the database, and then like if you ask it to do something, it'll like hit up the database, then give you stuff back. Controllers, their job are to process HTTP requests from like users, and then send a response. They're responsible for the request response cycle, the actual request and response part of it. And then views are responsible for the presentation, how those responses work, right? And our goal is always to keep those separate. And like our views really shouldn't be doing a lot of logic, but sometimes there's other things we want to do. Like how do we make our ratings turn into stars? And that seems really whimsical. I like that. So now we can start defining methods right here that then we can just use elsewhere. So I can always be like stars num end, and I can be like will return. You've seen me do this so many times at this point because it's one of my favorite little, whoops, wrong. We don't want muscles. Muscles might be fun. Times num, and this is just a helpful thing, right? We can use this anywhere. So here, I can now go back here. Stars. Key review rating. There's probably another way to abstract this. We could choose to abstract all of this into like one thing. We also might eventually want like a posted method, right? That will like start going through. It will be like posted at um, post date review dot created at. This is going to be Ruby. This might be helpful. And then we can be like, we can start writing like a little thing right here. Be like, def, post date, right? Date time. Date time. Draft. I'm going to just start copying things because YOLO. This documentation is annoying. They just have a sample. Thank you. There we go. That's exactly what I want. Oh, it even takes the string, but we can just be like this. This and this. So this is where you do all the like little things that would be like two or big things that don't really exist in the MVC framework, right? That do a little bit of logic for you, that do a little bit of Ruby stuff. This is now a really good review, right? Cool. Do we have any questions about helpers? Because I realized I just blew through them really quickly. These are just functions that you'll have access to across your controllers and views. I can call something from my reviews helper inside my restaurant's controller. If I'm doing that a lot, I should think, hey, does this really belong in the reviews helper? Or should I put it in the restaurants helper or the application helper? They all are accessible. The reason they're built down to just different files is just for your sake, so you can keep your code organized. And for your other programmers, like your other colleagues' sake, so that you can keep your code organized and they don't have to deal with your bullshit. So these are just like three different things that you can throw into your views and controllers. They're just a bunch of methods that you can define. Are we all cool with what helpers are? Cool. So we're running very close to the end here. Before we go, do we want to make it so that you can search for food by its like the kind of food it is? Like be like, hey, I want Thai food, or hey, I want Italian food, and then like have that render out? Or do you want to in the next? Cool, there we go, fine.
Wait, what was the other option? Does it have to do with the Latin long and finding location, or no?
We could. Do we want to just embed Google in the last 3 minutes and go embed a Google map?
Either that or I'll ask for it during a one-on-one. You know what?
I'm fine with either one. Either one is good.
How about both? So first off, for Google, the way I'm going to do that is I already told you I have an API key. I'm actually not going to use the latitude and longitude here because Google's too nice, too good for that now. I'm going to just Google embed API. Loop. Awesome. Just going to copy and paste this. This is an iframe. An iframe is somebody else's HTML that basically works inside of your web page. Basically, it opens up a little mini web page inside your web page that acts differently. There's a couple of things to know about it. One, and this one I learned the hard way by telling a student you cannot run JavaScript from your JavaScript on the iframe. We're still friends. And two, it's basically just an entirely different like little website inside your website. So it's really helpful for embedding. So I'm going to go back to my show and right here. There was so much I wanted to do. We could also do an average rating, which is also going to be helpful. I'm just going to copy and paste this really quickly. And now you'll see that Google just did like, basically wrote this out for me. It says API key. Here I can be like, bloop. What's up? You just saw this. Yep, that is very true. Tomorrow we are doing a features pod where we will be able to.
That's why I'm not worried about the search. Like, if we don't get to it, don't worry about it. I'll be at features tomorrow.
Cool.
So.
And I'll record that too. Remember, we can call the env key anywhere. Google key, I think. And we're first going to test this out on the Space Needle, and then we can make this work. So one thing about this API key is that because I am using it on my front end, because I'm using it in my view, there's actually a very specific problem with that, which is that any user can then go to my website and copy my API key. Google knows about its embed thing and will like allow you to be like, hey, only when you get a request from this website do you run it. Otherwise, please do not run my API key on like other websites. So you can set up your API keys like that. But cool. So now our picture of bread and spread in Dumbo shows us the Space Needle in Seattle. We're pretty close. I'm going to instead be like Brooklyn, New York. And I'm going to then string interpolate. Whoops, not string interpolate because we're not in Ruby. I'm going to say at restaurant.name. Because Google knows everything, this should be enough. Please work. I got a 400 error. What did it say? Let's take a look at what my.
The name of the address.
The address would totally. It added some space. Come on. Here we go. That's the issue. Yeah, the address would probably be more responsible than putting in the name. We can do that. Then we can get rid of Brooklyn, New York. And there it is. That's bread and spread. Cool. So we've got this little thing embedded. One other thing I would ask you all to take away from this or to think about before tomorrow's pod, if you want to attend, or just in general, is how would we use the helper we already had to create an average review method? And where would we be storing that average review method? And just like thinking about your thoughts on the MVC model, where you would put all that code. There's a bunch of things I still want to add to this, but we can save that for the pod tomorrow, which will be recorded. But I will now break for questions. And I'll point out one other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, because I just said I'd break for questions, and then I realized I still like to hear myself talk. We can go over to the routes. We might eventually want to like create like an update method for a review, or even an edit and update method. But you'll notice we built a very substantial app using only 3 routes. And also like the views weren't necessarily RESTful. Like we said right here, hey, like we're going to create this new post right here on the show page, which is a little bit different from the way we usually do it. And so like, just note like the user, I've always said the user, like the end experience is always a little bit more important. We still use a lot of RESTful conventions to get us here. There's one convention that I think that we skipped out on that would be really useful for us. And this is going to be a little bit of a preview for next mod, or next week rather, whoops. And that's that this hidden field wouldn't be necessary if instead of having my reviews routes be like to like post to reviews, right? Like we're currently posting to reviews, which doesn't tell us much. But if I had something that was like restaurants /1/reviews, right? And if I nested my routes, suddenly when I posted here, I would have access to this restaurant's ID. And that becomes the principle behind nested routes. Once I do this, once I start nesting my routes, I no longer have to start hiding in hidden fields. I'll just be like, hey, I'm going to post this review. And then from its params, it'll be like, oh, you sent over an ID from this restaurant. I'm going to assume that's the restaurant ID. And that's going to allow us to do less things with hidden fields and more things with our actual route params. And this still remains RESTful. Doing RESTful routes is still part, like doing nested routes is still part of RESTful routes. And the reason is it allows us to do things like this. And then we could eventually be like review/12/edit and not have to worry about like how we tell Rails how to do that. So that's a preview to the week ahead. And now I'll open up for questions. Awesome. So with that in mind, I'll let you all go.
You are gonna share this code, right?
I am.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. And then we will also share it. I will probably be working on the same branch in tomorrow's pod. So it might be updated from today if you work on it tomorrow. I can probably I'll git commit right now. So I'll be like, git status, git add, git commit. End of lecture on Thursday. And now if you go to the git log, you can always check it. If you go to git log, you can't do anything. But if you go to the git log, you can check out, you can be like git checkout and then copy this and paste this as the next string of checkout. And then we'll go back to that log. So it'll go back to that previous save. Cool? Let's do git push -u origin class self. That's saying, hey, remote branch, github.com. This is a new branch that I want you to start tracking by setting this upstream. Oh no. Did I already name something class solve? Yeah, I'm going to make a new branch because I don't know what will happen if I pull down. Class solve 0723 git push -u. Wait, I already had that. Cool. And that all worked. Cool.
All right, thanks, Nikki.
Cool. Have a nice one.
Thank you.